So this is, you'll be glad to know, the last talk about Ensembl, and I'm going to be talking about the Ensembl REST API. So as I said, last one, we're all done after this. So a slightly different thing here. So I'm going to talk about what the REST API is and how it works. We're going to try out some endpoints, but I'm going to dip back and forth quite a bit between this. And then there aren't exercises on the REST API in the Train Online course. Instead, if you're interested in it, if you think it's something you'll use, I do recommend taking our online course, which I will point you to, which is a separate thing, which is like 3 or 4 hours long if you do it. So it's not just a bit of homework. That's if you really care about it, if you really want to do it, then do it. But if you don't think you're going to need it, then don't bother. So right at the beginning of this series, Astrid mentioned access scales. And the REST API really fits into this spot here. So it can be good for looking up things on a one-by-one basis and linking bits of data together. And it can also be good for looking up groups of data. The REST API isn't suitable for looking at data on a whole genome level, however. So what is a REST API? Well, REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It describes how one system can communicate state with another. This occurs over HTTPS, and it provides machine-readable, language-agnostic methods to access remote data. Put in slightly more simple terms, if I write a URL that says rest.ensembl.org and then tell it data I want, which I have to do in a very specific format, it then sends data back at me in this kind of plain text format. So Ensembl REST is language agnostic, so it works by using URLs, but then you can create code around these URLs in any language you like. And if you've used our Perl API or heard about our Perl API at all, it does only expose a fraction of what the Perl API can do, but it's also much easier to work with than the Perl API. The learning curve on the REST API is not that steep. And of course, it's that language agnostic, so you can start from whatever language you happen to know, coding language. You can get going with that with the REST API. What it is and what it is not, it does provide HTTP access to Ensembl. It is stable. However, it is limited by network latency. We may, if somebody really hammers it, it may slow it down for somebody else, which means we also put rate limits on queries. It is read-only, so you can't write into our database, which is very good for us. And it is versions. There are archives available. It is not these fancy terms that people who know a lot about REST APIs mean. It is not hypermedia as the engine of application state, and it is not fully RESTful. A lot of people who work with REST APIs will discuss and debate what is meant by a REST API. Some of them would argue that ours is not a full REST API. It doesn't matter, it's usable. That's what matters. There are not mirrors, so there was some discussion a few days ago about using the different mirrors, the US East, US West databases. We don't actually have that on the REST API. We only have one. You can only access the main database here at EBI using the REST API. It's not fully efficient. I wouldn't say that you can completely mine the whole database. If you're looking to mine the entire database, there are other methods for doing that are more efficient. However, this is probably the most user-friendly. And it does have incomplete coverage. You cannot get all of the data in the Ensembl database via the REST API. So in REST, we talk about endpoints. So what is an endpoint? This is the sort of technical definition. In REST, the resource typically refers to some object or set of objects that are exposed at an API endpoint. Here's an example. An endpoint by itself is just a reference to a URI that accepts web requests that may or may not be RESTful. Put in more simple terms, an endpoint is a particular output that you can get with a particular input. If I tell the REST server this, I get out that, and that's kind of the combination of parameters. And it's a function that interacts with the database. So endpoint documentation, if you go to rest.ensemble.org, you will find a list of all the endpoints. These are grouped by function. They show you the required parameters for each endpoint, and they show you optional parameters. And they show you example code for accessing them. And so they're functionally grouped. There's things like archive, so finding old versions of IDs. Comparative genomics will get you gene trees, it will get you homologs. Cross-references will get you links to other database. Information will tell you what's in the database, which database version you're looking up. Lookup allows you to put in IDs and find out what they are. Mapping is for looking at converting genome coordinates to protein coordinates and vice versa, things like that. You have ontology and taxonomy, sequence, variation. There are actually loads of them. I'm just going to hop out of my presentation and actually show you this in the documentation. So here's our full list. It's at rest.ensemble.org. And you can see as I scroll down, I have these topics. Now you can find the things you're interested in by scrolling and looking on the page. I prefer to use my Control or Command S, and I will put in, say, lookup. And so here on the screen you can see I've got something which has got lookups in. I'm just going to go to the next one. And here we've got the whole lookup category. So this allows you to find the species and database for a single identifier. So if you've got an Ensembl ID, you can put it in and you can find out what species it is, what database it is, get the things like the gene name and stuff. So if I click through to this Get Lookup ID, we have this documentation page. And so this at the top is saying Get Lookup /ID, and then it's got this /:ID. And this /:ID represents where you would actually put the identifier. And then it repeats this information to me. So it says parameters, and it says required parameter ID. And we have an example value. Then we've got a bunch of optional parameters. These are things that we could put into our query as well if we wanted to. And then below that, we've got example requests. So we've got something that you could use. And I can actually just click on this. And it shows me what I would actually get. So if you look here, we've got rest.ensemble.org, lookup ID, and then we've got the identifier, and then we've got a couple of the optional parameters, and this is the output that I would get from it. I've also got, underneath this, I've got example output, and then I have some examples here. So if I click on Perl, it gives me code that I can just copy and paste and put into a Perl script in order to call this endpoint, or a Python 2 script, or a Python 3 script, or Ruby, or Java, or R. So all these different coding languages that I could potentially use this. And any of this you can just copy and paste to make it really easy. So I have already gone through what's on this page. So you've got the ID in the URL, you've got the optional parameters, and you've got the sample code. So the easiest way to make REST calls is to put URLs into the browser, and this can actually just be a really quick lookup. And it can let you test URLs in scripts. It lets you see if they've worked, if you've included the correct stuff, and it also shows you what the output looks like, which can be very useful. So one that you actually use all the time is this ping endpoint. So if I just, ping just tells you if you've got connection to the database. And if I just go back to the, sorry, that's trying to open the webinar document page for me. If I go back to the endpoints page, and again, I'm going to search for ping. As you can see, it checks if the service is alive. So if I click on this, ping is 1. That tells me, yes, I'm connected to the database. Everything is fine. So this could be your first port of call if you find that your queries aren't working. there are, as I've kind of pointed out, loads and loads of other endpoints. So one that we've kind of looked at, this lookup endpoint. So giving this example, if you put in rest.ensemble.org and then you do / and then you put in all the sort of name of the endpoint followed by the necessary parameters, which in this case is this gene ID, followed by a question mark, and then you put all the optional parameters separated by semicolons, you'll get something that looks like this. So I'll just show you. If I copy this and I put it into my browser, I get my output. So I can see that this identifier comes from Ensembl Havana. It's a gene. It's an Ensembl Havana gene. It's version number 13. It's in human. It's BRAF proto-oncogene series and threonine kinase, which comes from HNC. It's called BRAF. I've got all this information in this very simple text-based format, which is really useful. And the great advantage of having it in this text-based format is it then can work with scripting. So scripting allows you to extract specific bits of data from your REST call, to output in your preferred format, to link together calls for more complicated queries, and to integrate them into a much larger pipeline. And they're designed to be accessed using any programming language at all. And so you can make calls and decode them within any script. There are some examples, as we saw on the documentation pages, but we have kind of more extensive examples. We have an online course in Python, Perl, and R. So here's an example of a script that requests the gene by ID in Python. So this part of the script here uses the request module of Python to fetch the endpoint. So we have the server, the extension, and the content type defined. So we've just got a subroutine here. You fetch the endpoint and you print the results. And this is kind of reusable code that you can use in any script. We have a similar query doing exactly the same thing in Perl, and another query doing the same thing in R. I've just got this query, in a Microsoft Azure Jupyter notebook, and what I can do, if you see, this is the Python query that I just showed you a moment ago. I'm not logged in, that's why I can't run it. Right, now it will let me run it. So this is the one I showed before, and if I hit run, you'll see that this whole script then communicates with the database and gives us the data output that we were looking for, that we saw just with the putting it into the browser, but now it's doing it with a script. And having done this, if we look at our results that we get for this, one of the ways we recommend getting data output is in JSON format. And you'll see that JSON format consists of key value pairs. It's basically a massive, and depending on what language you're using, you'll use different words for this, dictionary hash data frame with keys and values. Sometimes it may then contain another nested dictionary or list, which contains another one, which contains another one, which contains another one. So you can pull stuff out because it is a dictionary. You can say, right, well, I want this item, but sometimes to get the thing you want, you actually have to go kind of 3 steps into your dictionary to get it. And you can also cycle through all the keys in a dictionary. So if we take this example here, if I want to get the gene name, then I've got this display name is braf, and so my output could then be display name from this query that I've done. You can also then link them together. So if you can pull a data point, you can then use it as input from another data point. And you can link objects and extensions together. So here's another example where we run our first query, where we're doing a lookup of a gene name, and here's our gene name. And then as a result of that, we use the ID from the get lookup, and we put that into another query, the get sequence, and we print out the sequence. So again, I've got a thing I can run. If I hit, this is the same script, if I hit run on this, it gives me the output I've had here, the gene name followed by the sequence, which is quite cool. And we've got examples for this. We can do this in any language. The exact same query, this is a Python query. You can do the exact same thing in Perl. You can do the exact same thing in R. If you want to do the exact same thing in Java, and you know how to work with Java, you can do that. There are two kind of methods. All of the endpoints we've looked at so far are what are called get endpoints. Get endpoints basically allow you to put in one item, and you get back the data for that one item. Post endpoints allow you to put in a list. So you're then doing a query, and you're doing exactly the same query on all of the things you've put in your list. So you would put in something like IDs equals, and this is obviously a very short list, but it can be a much longer list than just two. We also do rate limiting to prevent a single user from monopolizing the resources, to prevent basically the whole thing shutting down for everybody else. We put rate limits on this, and so we suggest, if you're having problems, if it's not going through, putting weights on your scripts and things. If you're keen on working with the REST API, so today's course was really a kind of intro to show you what is available. We do have a full course online which uses Jupyter Notebooks. So I just showed you one of the Jupyter Notebooks a moment ago, and these have code embedded in them for accessing our REST API. So if I just go back to this notebook again, what we have is kind of pages with a bit of text explaining what's going on, and then there's bits of script that you can run and you can copy and paste. And then if I go down to the bottom of the page, I have an exercise which I can then write in this box, and I can paste in all the things that I'm doing, and I can run that within the notebook, which is it just makes it nice and easy. And then if I go onto the next page, I have a script which gives me a possible answer that works for this particular query. And we do have these notebooks. If I go back to the home page for this, for our training page, you'll see that there's a notebook in R, a notebook in Perl, and a notebook in Python as well. You do need a Microsoft account to use these, but Microsoft accounts are free, and a lot of people have them anyway. If you've got a Skype account or anything like that, you'll have a Microsoft account, and you have to clone the notebook, and that allows you to interact with it. But I do recommend strongly having a go at the full course, and that it also gives you loads and loads of scripts that you can just copy and paste into your own, and then manipulate to use your own way. I've been told that the correct way to program is to copy and paste and to Google. So I do recommend doing those two things if you are working with the REST API. Copy and paste anything you can out of that course or anywhere else you can find it. Google everything, and you should find it okay. So I have seen a few queries and things coming in. People have had some questions in the Slack workspace. Is there anything that I need to go over that it would be better if I went over on the screen? Or are you happy, everything handled? Okay. So for this case, there isn't a course exercise, but I will make sure that there's a link on the training page to that, to the Jupyter notebooks where you can do the full course. And if you want help with any of the exercises that have been any part of this course, then please do use the Slack workspace or send us an email on helpdesk@ensemble.org. We will keep monitoring these Slack workspaces regularly for the next week, and then we'll probably stop watching after that point, so it's best to email us then. And that's us done. These are all the things that we've covered as part of the course. Absolutely tons of help and documentation, as has been mentioned, and do email us for help if anything you're stuck with, anything you don't understand. And if you want to find out what's coming out, what changes are occurring, why they're happening, please follow us on social media to find out. We also post jobs and things there if you want to come and work with us. And if you use our stuff, please cite us. Again, this is the team you're probably fed up of seeing us all, and this is all our funders, to whom we are incredibly grateful.